Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to DFS Army's NBA Tournament Strategy Show, where usually we would talk about last night's slate, but then we'll talk about today's slate. We'll talk about guys we want to go under on, over on. It's still pretty early, so it's really just the strategy of it. Talk through potential situations. I'm sure there will be injury news that throws us all for a whirl, but when we have pre-lock show, which is at 5:30 p.m. for VIP members only, link in the description if you're interested, then we can really talk about and get in the weeds about how we're going to use the domination station and who we want to go over on, and how we're going to get leverage, etc. But anyway, I'm happy. Last night and yesterday, we crushed NFL. There were multiple five-figure takedowns. I had a positive day, which was exciting too, and just a lot of good things across the board. I didn't play NBA, which is why there's nothing to really look at, but glad football went well. Dixon, good to see you, man. Lunchtime, I hear you. For me, that's a little bit after the show. Michael Ortiz, I hope you're doing well. I hope everyone's doing well. But yesterday's in the past. Let's focus on today's slate. Honestly, just in general, looking at this slate as a whole, we're lacking a little bit of news. We're lacking a little bit of injury news to kind of give us that value to feel excited about this slate. But I'm cautiously optimistic we'll get it, hopefully in this first game. Uh, for those of you that don't know, the Celtics, they played yesterday. They usually at least have one guy, usually Al Horford, at least out, coming off the back end of a back-to-back. I know I saw people talking about Porzingis was limping a little bit. Wouldn't shock me if Holiday might sit here. But anyway, this is the first game on the slate, so we should get this news in time so we don't have to talk about it too much yet. But if we get a few of these guys out, they have a very nice matchup against the Hornets. This is going to be a team I want to target. So I'm hoping we get some nice value here, and we get some news that will make this team a little bit more exciting to play. If Horford is out and Porzingis plays, I'm fine playing him, especially if people are nervous about it because of how he looked yesterday. We like to play bigs against the Hornets. That's not anything new to us. Jason Tatum, of course, is your pay up option here. The spread does concern me, this 9-point spread, but the total's high enough where I'm not overly concerned. But again, really just taking a wait and see approach. If for some weird, odd reason everyone plays, I'm not going to be super exposed to the Celtics tonight, but I'll probably try to take a shot on one of their cheaper guys in the 7K range. Dixon said Josiah had a parlay of Laurie and AD both to score 30 each, and AD sold me 3 points short. Oh man, that hurts, especially if you're gonna win 500. Whenever you need AD the most, that's when he disappoints you almost every time. Dylan, good to see you, man. Hope life's going well. It's gonna be a weird week, Thanksgiving and everything coming up. No basketball on Thursday, but football on Thursday. So interested in seeing what we do from like a content standpoint. But yeah, Celtics aren't that interesting yet, but I'm hoping they will be later. For the Hornets, another team that's not overly exciting. You all know I don't like to pick on the Celtics too much. Guys like Hayward and Miller are a lot less enticing, with Bridges coming in and taking a lot of minutes. Also has a decent usage rate. LaMelo Ball has been awesome. I feel like we've been getting his strong spots right more often than not. But I, again, don't love picking on the Celtics here. Drew Holiday is a strong on-ball defender. Not a guy I'm trying to pick on too much. LaMelo Ball can definitely get there if this game stays close, but hard me to find a great reason for it. Jorge, Bridges is the one guy that I am considering here on this team. I'm not at the point where I want to force Miles Bridges in quite yet. He is coming off the bench, but he's seeing 30 plus minutes, which is something that we don't see a lot for a lot of the guys who come off the bench. And again, his usage rate is nice. I like what he's doing. I just don't like the matchup against the Celtics. So I would expect to have some exposure to Bridges, especially if we don't get any more value on this slate. He's in the mix for kind of like that mid-range build, but not someone that I'm overly excited about quite yet, just because of the tough matchup against the Celtics. Dixon, don't tell me that. And I hate how right you are, mostly because we know who LaMelo's dad is, knowing how much his dad wants attention, he's going to try to get ball out of here, which is disappointing. But true. Anyway, next up we have the Bucks against the Wizards. Another game with a nice total but a wide spread. We know what to do here. We can play bigs against the Wizards. Giannis is a little bit scarier. I would say that he's definitely GPP viable, but his price tag is a little hard to stomach with Lillard and crew all healthy here. Brook Lopez is the guy I would prefer to play. Again, he is the actual center for this team. We like playing bigs against Washington. We saw what Brook Lopez did to the Hornets on Friday. Speaking of, Friday was another really good NBA DFS slate, so I'm glad a lot of those plays hit. But I'm comfortable going right back to Brook Lopez here against the Wizards. And then, like I said, Giannis is the only other guy I would consider here. But the price tag scares me because I do prefer other options on the slate. But we'll have to see how the rest of the slate develops. Damian Lillard is interesting. We've seen him start to get a little bit back to himself over the last few games. But personally, I'm not overly excited about it. I'm just not super excited about it. Bobby Portis, I get the argument for, but I think there's better guys in this range. Yeah, no one else is really standing out for me. It's Lopez and Giannis here. For the Wizards, I know we all hate him. I know he looks like trash, even when there are quote unquote baddies at the games or whatever people say. Like, Jordan Poole sucked. Like, he just has not been that guy this season. But one thing that we have seen proven time and time again against this Bucks team is that we can play guards against them, and guards can perform well. Can a bad guard at this point in his career like Jordan Poole do well? Who knows? But it's an increased likelihood of that happening. And so I'm hoping Jordan Poole won't be chalky, but it wouldn't shock me if he is, because like I said, we're lacking value on this slate. Kuzma's fine, but I'm not excited about him. Denny Avdia, I think it's okay to have him in the mix, but again, not overly excited about that. I don't like picking on the Bucks front court too often. I know Avdia, he can shoot and get hot every now and then, so I'm okay with him being in the mix, but it's not something I'm overly passionate about. I expect, just because of the way the slate is starting to look like from a lack of value, that I'll probably have some pieces to like Jones, Gafford, Bilal, even like Gallinari, Kispert, Shaman. I think they're all fine, but you don't want to go too crazy on these guys. Outside of Poole's not going to be a core play for me, I don't expect, but these Wizards are not guys you want as core plays. They are just lineup fillers. They just help you make lines. They're not people you want to go significantly over the field on, unless we get ownership later and someone's super low, then maybe we can target that. But just looking at it, no. Yeah, Jamie, they've been lying about that LeBron time limit all season. I feel like they have to make a rule at some point or something where coaches can't just keep lying out of their ass for random shit like this. But what do I know? What do I know? Yeah, I heard the trade rumors about Poole as well. I usually don't try to shy away from guys who are in trade conversations. Sometimes they might even be given more minutes to, have a stronger performance. So it's a little bit easier to sell them off to other teams, especially a guy like Poole who's looked really bad, like he might be broken or something. But that's just narrative speak. Who really knows what's happening behind closed doors? Dixon said, putting my kids' college fund on the Jordan Poole unders. Yeah, I don't. That's been a good way of making money so far. You're not wrong, man. Avdi is upset the visiting fans are louder than, yeah. As a Panthers fan, I understand what that feels like. For the next game, we have the Nuggets against the Pistons. And honestly, it's hard for me to find a nugget I don't like here. Jokic is obvious. He's not. He is going to need to be crazy expensive for him not to be worth having in your mix. He's going to be a guy I'm having exposure to tonight. 12,800 looks crazy, sounds crazy. You would expect that he would regress at some point, but I'm not trying to predict that because he's shown no sign of that. Of course, he struggled against the Cavs in the last game, but that makes total sense. Almost the Cavs front court is a strong defensive team. I never foresaw that going well. So that situation made sense to me. I'm totally fine with this matchup for him. I like Michael Porter Jr. He's been a little off here lately, not as consistent as he was a little bit earlier to start the season, but he's still only 6,800. We're still lacking value on this slate, so I expect for him to be in my mix, and I'm totally fine being over the field on him. Aaron Gordon, same exact story. We're looking for a little bit more of that upside, but at least now he's cheaper than MPJ, which I appreciate. Yeah, like Jamie, I feel like they have to do something because it's starting to feel sketchy. It's just sketchy. It's just not cool. They have to fix it. Jorge said, I don't trust Jackson. Yeah, you shouldn't trust Reggie Jackson if that's who you're talking about. I like Reggie Jackson because he's 5K, and I'll say it for the people in the back. We're lacking value on this slate. And so, because of that, it makes guys like Reggie Jackson more viable because he makes your lines work. Same way with some of those Washington guys. We don't trust any of them, but the only way we can make lineups right now is by using a little bit of them to try and be able to pay up and play and pay for your Jokic's and Giannis's and stuff like that. Reggie Jackson fits in those kind of lineups. Now, with that being said, Reggie Jackson is one of those guys that I am going to deprioritize if we get more interesting news where stars or other players are going to be out and better value starts to show up. Reggie Jackson is not someone that I'm trying to make sure I keep exposure to on this slate, but for now, I have to, so it's fine. Outside of that, KCP fits that filler role, but not overly excited about it. And I don't like any of the other pieces here for the Nuggets. Pistons are a little bit more interesting. Asar Thompson has been fantastic, but he's typically been a better play on FanDuel just because of the way they handle scoring. He's fine on DK, but hard to prioritize by any means. Cade Cunningham is interesting. I think this is a decent spot for him against the Nuggets. Again, the Nuggets in general are a pretty solid defense, not one I like to pick on too often, but Cade Cunningham at 7,700 is pretty cheap for the upside he's proven he's had this season and just the form he's been in. So I like the spot. I want to see where ownership falls. If he's chalky, I'm leaning towards not following the chalk too much, maybe just being around field weight. I don't need to get over it, but if he's low owned, potential leverage play. So keep a close eye on that. From an injury news standpoint, we're waiting for some stuff for the Pistons that could make things a little bit more interesting. Killian Hayes is listed as TBD. Livers is TBD. Duran is TBD. So there's a few guys we're looking out for here. Might even be able to play Kevin Knox, which isn't the most exciting play, especially going up against the Nuggets, but would be a bit more viable if Duran ended up being out. And then, of course, Stewart would become more viable, potentially even Bagley if he starts. So a few things that could adjust the way we look at this slate, but we'll have to keep a close eye out for that. And then Killian Hayes, if he misses this game, the guards see a nice little boost as well. A guy like Alec Burks would be slightly more viable, but again, we wouldn't be getting an extreme value on his price tag, so not the most exciting pieces there. Even Jaden Ivey would probably be a little bit more interesting as well. I want to look a little bit closer at the data and usage increases for him. So something to keep a close eye out for. The Clippers are another team I like a good bit. We got this right on Friday too at much lower ownership than I was expecting. James Harden crushed, so I'm glad we're over the field on him. Terrence Mann was able to get there, but it was a struggle for him. Norman Powell did well. Paul George and Kawhi, I don't think they were fantastic in that game against the Rockets, but my memory is not always the best, so don't quote me on that. I am still very comfortable going back to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard here and James Harden here. Again, just like in that matchup against the Rockets, these guys aren't going against the best teams in the NBA right now, and I expect them to look a lot better facing these bad teams. And so I struggle deciding who to choose between Paul George and Kawhi. And so ultimately, I just want to make sure I have exposure to both, especially if we don't get more value on this slate. Because they're priced 8,600, 8,100, they have just as much upside most of the time as some of the other studs on this slate. And so if we're lacking value, I want to go over on Paul George and Kawhi Leonard just as a way to build strong lineups. Whereas if we do get that value, I'm comfortable prioritizing guys like Jokic and Giannis and Tatum a bit more instead. But I'm leaning towards Paul George over Kawhi, depending on how the slate plays out, just because Paul George, he's the only one whose usage hasn't changed at all since James Harden has joined this team, whereas Kawhi and Westbrook and the other guys on this team have seen a bit of a decrease. The last guy I'll mention here is Zubac. His minutes have been all over the place, and they brought Daniel Tease in as like someone to help solidify their front court a bit more, which has impacted Westbrook's minutes alongside just being on the bench. I think it's an interesting situation. I want to see how it plays out a bit more before I take a shot. So we'll see it. There he is. What's up, man? Yeah, the early show catching it live. I usually see you on the pre-lock show. Not really for this one, but glad to have you. Thank you for sticking around with us on a Monday. I feel like Mondays are always a little bit more of a lull. We're kind of getting back into the week. Football Monday. So it's always a little interesting to see how things play out. But I like the Clippers tonight, guys. Probably more than most, I hope. The Spurs, hard for me to get to these guys. If I am taking a shot here, it will probably be with Trey Jones at the guard spot. Maybe Keldon Johnson just as like a scoring piece for them if they're going to keep this game close. The spread is relatively wide. Victor's a little pricey for me. Again, if we lack value, then the mid-range is going to be an area I want to focus on. So I'm okay having a little bit of exposure to him, but ideally I would prefer to pay up instead of playing Victor tonight against the Clippers. So yeah, ultimately not a team I'm overly excited about. Poor Malachi Branham, man. We all thought he was going to be a lock to start, but not as much. Champini has been doing pretty well. Dixon. Yeah, me too, Darius. Me too. All right. This Heat against the Bulls game is an interesting one. So it's the lowest total game on the slate because these two teams, decent defense for the Heat, play at a relatively slow pace for the Bulls. So the low total makes sense. The enticing part, though, is that this spread is supposed to be relatively close at 1.5. And so that does keep these guys viable on a small slate. But again, none of them are going to stand out too much. You're probably going to have to force exposure to these guys if you get any. The only guys I'm considering for the Heat tonight are Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, and Duncan Robinson. Bam, I don't expect myself to get to, but I think he's a viable play here, worth mentioning, but I'm not excited about him. Other center plays I like more, both cheaper and higher. Jimmy Butler, I feel like we talk about this all the time. When the game is close, that's usually when Jimmy Butler has some of his stronger performances. Again, another situation I don't foresee myself forcing exposure to. Would love if it happens a bit naturally when the run lines, but worth mentioning. And then Duncan Robinson has been another guy the team has been leaning on a good bit to score for them with Hero out and some of the other guys like Lowry underperforming. So Duncan Robinson's always worth a solid GPP spot as well. So no one's going to be a core play or potentially even a leverage play, but I don't want to forget about these guys on this slate because it could be a little sneaky for them just because they are so involved for this offense. And the spread is close. Now, the Bulls, we can talk about the trio and Caruso and crew, but with everyone healthy, assuming no one ends up getting ruled out later today, I'm not excited to play these guys, and I don't foresee myself doing so, to be honest. So no Bulls for me tonight. Finally, a game that's a little bit more interesting. We have the Kings against the Pelicans. Sabonis has been on fire, man. He's been good, and it's been hard to get away from him. Fox has been in decent form as well. Gun to head, have to pick one or the other. I prefer Fox, and honestly, it's not particularly close for me, but I like the difference in price tag, and I'm hoping Fox is slightly lower owned than Sabonis, but we'll have to wait for that ownership to come through later today. But I like this spot for both of them. I think they're both fine, but obviously I prefer Jokic over Sabonis, so naturally I'm going to have more Fox in that situation as well. Outside of that, we do have Herder listed as questionable, TBD to be exact. And this is a game that I do want to like. If Herder's out, I want to have more exposure to Monk or some of the other guys on this team. I'll do a little bit deeper research to see what that might look like as potential plays that might be lower owned. But just because we're lacking injury news on this slate, I want to make sure that if Herder actually is out, I'm making the right pivots. So it's a spot I'm paying a lot of attention to. So keep an eye out for it. For the Pelicans, these guys have been a little not so great as of late. I think the matchup against the Kings is just fine. I just feel kind of mad about it. I do feel like ultimately by the time we get to the pre-lock show, I'll end up being over the field on Ingram or Zion. Again, especially we're in the mid-range plays. If we don't have as much opportunity to pay up on this slate, then it's more realistic that will happen. As of right now, I'm leaning towards Zion, but we'll have to look at ownership, and I'll dig a little bit more throughout the day. Outside of that, no one's really standing out for me, which is unfortunate because I usually like taking some shots here and there on some of the cheapies, but can't do it today. Dixon said Levine is approaching Jordan Poole territory and DeRozan isn't far behind. Yeah, they haven't been great. And I haven't played too many Bulls this year, so I haven't been burned as often as a lot of people, but it's hard to trust any of them. That's why I keep saying, like, I'm looking forward to when they eventually trade one of these guys and they'll be a lot more playable, ideally. Dixon, honestly, that changes on every slate. I mean, center, if you're talking about a guy like Jokic, for sure, but it's not really something I overly think about as much as I used to, just because it really depends on what price range you're talking about, because there's a very wide range of outcomes for all the positions, really more so based on price range than position range. Dixon said, which positions get more bonuses on DK versus FanDuel? I mean, consistently, bigs do, but point guards typically have more upside, and that's for most sites. It's usually the philosophy. Let's see. All right, next up we have the Knicks against the Timberwolves. And again, guys, a team I don't like to pick on from an offensive standpoint are the Timberwolves. They're a really good defense this season. Randall, not interesting to me. If I'm taking a shot here against a solid defense, it's typically going to be of shooters. And so that would be Brunson and or Barrett for me. But again, not an extremely exciting spot for either of them. For Brunson, I would prefer paying up about 1,000 and playing Fox. And then Barrett is just kind of in the mix. And ideally, I'm not getting a ton of him either. But again, streaky shooters, you can play them. They're viable, but not super exciting. Grimes is listed as questionable. If he's out, again, that's a little bit of a boost to your Barretts, your Harts, your Brunson. So I would be a little bit more interested in them, but I don't foresee them having ceiling performances. But Brunson's the one guy I'm thinking about, but we'll have to look and see what his ownership is later today, because if he's chalky, I'm not getting there. Now, the Timberwolves side, they're dealing with a similar issue, going up a decent defense in the Knicks, especially their front court. So Karl-Anthony Towns isn't exciting for me. I don't foresee myself getting to him on this slate. Mike Conley, again, we're lacking value, so he just makes things work, but he's a low usage guy, so not someone that you feel great putting into your lineups. You'll be begging for every single point typically in these spots. But when I'm thinking about potential leverage plays, I'm thinking about guys like Anthony Edwards, who's 8,700, who can be electric, especially in a game that's supposed to stay close with a 2.5 point spread. So Anthony Edwards is a bit more exciting to me, or for me. Rudy Gobert, I'm thinking about mostly only because he's so cheap. And in a tough matchup like this, if he can avoid foul trouble, I do think he can still surpass his value. So he's worth keeping in mind, but not a play that I'm overly excited about. It's once again one of those situations of just waiting to see where ownership falls and then kind of deciding if I want to go over or under based on how chalky someone is. So Interesting spots, but we got to keep a close eye on ownership because that's a key piece to a lot of this. The Rockets. Earlier today, I wasn't overly excited about the Rockets, but they've grown with me, or they've grown on me over the course of the slate or the day. A lot of you and a lot of us out there, me, myself included, like having exposure to the hammer game. I like that this slate is a little bit smaller than what we've been getting with some of the massive slates. But one of the annoying pieces about it is that all of these games start at 8 or before, and then we have a 10 o'clock game. So if you're in first place and it's 9:55, probably shouldn't be that excited quite yet. And part of that is because there's guys like Şengün. We typically do like playing like bigs against the Warriors, uh, especially when Draymond is out. I do think we can pick on this front court. So Şengün is in a fantastic spot. Probably my favorite center play on the slate because of that. Of course, he's priced well. Should be pretty chalky though, so that's the one thing that makes me a little bit more nervous about it. Fred VanVleet, 7,500. He's shown his upside throughout the season. Fantastic spot for him. I don't think anyone's surprised about that. The Warriors, they struggle defensively when Draymond doesn't play. Fred VanVleet is the Rockets' best offensive piece right now. And so 1 + 1 = 2. It makes sense to play Fred VanVleet. So Şengün and Fred VanVleet are going to be priorities for me on this slate. Again, we'll have to watch out and see where ownership is. That might make me want to potentially pivot, but I don't foresee that being the case, at least not as of right now. Jalen Green. I know y'all aren't going to like this. Jalen Green's in a fine spot, but I prefer Poole tonight over Green. Ownership, of course, if Poole is significantly chalkier than Green, I think that's a fine pivot off of the Poole chalk if Poole ends up being chalky. But I think Poole's a bit more interesting than he is from a price range standpoint. And then there's guys like Tate who just make things work. Not a play you're excited about, not someone who should be a core play for you, but I'm okay being around field weight or slightly over that if we're continue to lack value on this slate. And then for the Warriors, the team that where everyone sucks besides Curry. Curry is the only guy I don't want to forget about. He has a history of crushing the Rockets, and just because it happened in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen again, but he does everything for this team, and I expect him to be very involved. So he's one of those pay-up options that I'm going to keep a close eye on ownership for because I think this could be a smash spot for him. Outside of that, hard for me to get overly excited about these guys. Clay hasn't looked fully right. Andrew Wiggins, again, just hasn't been that explosive this season. Kevin Looney, assuming Kerr doesn't want to get weird with the starting lineup again, is projecting well, but hard to get overly excited about a lot of these plays just because the starting lineup will impact a lot of it for me. And so, yeah, basically I'm just prioritizing Curry here, and then whatever the domination station gives me, I'll have to look at. But interesting slate is going to be one where we have to keep a close eye on the news per usual for NBA DFS players. But fingers crossed we get some news that actually lets us have fun with this slate and play some of these hopefully low-owned studs. Dixon, I say crazy stuff sometimes. I'm going to say something crazy. He said, I'll bet you everything I own, Jalen Green outscores Poole tonight and every night. Dixon, I mean, if you're the only one putting money on the line, I'm definitely willing to take you up on that bet. But I actually do. I would take Poole over Green tonight. And it sounds crazy, but I love the matchup. This might be the night where he finally puts the knife in my heart and I'm like, never again. But I think it's more likely this is the night where I'm like, hey, I finally got back on the Poole train in the right amount of time. I haven't played him in a few slates, so I deserve the pain if he fails me. But y'all, that's going to be everything. Of course, I'll be on for the pre-lock show later today at 5:30 p.m. We'll talk through what we're actually doing in the domination station with the news that we should actually have at that point. But It'll be fun. Yeah, appreciate you, Dixon, for sticking around with me, man. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. See you later.